"Ma'am, this isn't a valid medication. You cannot bring this contraband onto the plane." Flight attendant Janet Morrison's cold, sharp voice rang out in the first-class cabin of Delta Flight 447 as it prepared to depart JFK for Los Angeles. With a sudden jerk, she plucked the asthma inhaler from the trembling hand of 70-year-old Edna Harris, a black grandmother. The abrupt action froze the entire cabin in tense silence. Edna's eyes flew open in terror, each labored breath rattling painfully from her frail chest. Panic and pain were etched deep into her weathered face as she reached for Janet, her voice quivering in desperation. "Please, that's my asthma medicine. I can't breathe without it." Janet Morrison merely curled her lip in a sneer, hoisting the inhaler like damning evidence before all the passengers. Her gaze was sharp and contemptuous, as though passing sentence on a criminal in open court. Tilting her head, she raised her voice so everyone could hear. "Asthma medicine? Maybe next you'll claim these little candies are cancer treatment." Her careless mockery made nearby travelers shift uncomfortably, casting furtive glances at the distressed elderly woman shaking in her seat. The air felt heavier still as Edna's breaths grew more frantic, her body convulsing as if fighting to reclaim every precious lungful. Several passengers discreetly pulled out phones, recording the scene while exchanging uneasy looks. Edna's silver medical ID bracelet reflected the cabin lights as she held her arm up, trying to show Janet the engraved information. "Look, please. I really have severe asthma. This bracelet proves it." Janet didn't even glance at the bracelet. With a tone dripping disdain, she cut her off. "Cheap costume jewelry. I've seen plenty of tricks like this." In row 12, young Laura Rodriguez quietly started an Instagram Live. She whispered into her phone, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "Hey, everybody, it's Laura. I'm on Delta Flight 447, and you've got to see this blatant discrimination happening right now." Her video went viral almost instantly. Views and outraged comments spooled in by the second. But none of that mattered to Edna now, as every breath grew weaker. Edna tried again, voice breaking as she struggled for air. "My name is Edna Harris. I have very severe asthma. I'm flying to Los Angeles for my sister's funeral. Please, I can't." Janet snapped back immediately, her tone icy and cruel. "Save the sob story. This plane's about to take off, and I won't tolerate any illegal activity on board." Some passengers murmured anxiously, craning their necks to see what was happening. Edna's face had gone ashen. Sweat beaded on her brow as she gasped. The unmistakable signs of an acute asthma attack were plain for all to see. "Please," she repeated, voice faint and hoarse, reaching out toward Janet in despair, only to be met with the flight attendant's indifferent stare. From seat 14C, an older man who'd introduced himself at boarding as retired doctor. Robert Chen rose unsteadily. Recognizing the emergency, he hurried forward. "Excuse me, I'm a doctor. That woman is having an acute asthma attack. You need to return her inhaler immediately." Janet spun on him, voice sharp with authority. "Please sit down. This is crew business. I will not tolerate passenger interference." Dr. Chen hesitated. He didn't want to escalate matters, but could not stand by and watch Edna suffer. He looked helplessly at Janet, then at the other passengers seeking support, but everyone averted their eyes. Tension crackled through the cabin like a live wire. Edna's phone rang insistently in her lap, the screen showing Michael Harris, her son. But she lacked the strength to answer. All her energy was focused on taking her next breath. Janet stood firm in the aisle, clutching the inhaler as though it were contraband. Edna Harris sat motionless in her seat, straining for each fragile breath as life itself seemed slipping away. A few passengers whispered in unease, phones still recording Edna's worsening state. Yet Janet Morrison remained unmoved, cold and resolute, unaware that she was driving everyone toward a breaking point that would forever change their lives on that fateful flight. Janet Morrison stood unmoving in the narrow aisle, her cold eyes brimming with contempt as she looked down at Edna Harris, now hunched over, gasping for breath as if each inhale were a desperate fight for survival. The air in Delta Flight 447's cabin grew thick, and the soft whispers of fellow passengers swelled, shattering the earlier quiet. Janet's voice rang out again, laced with bitter sarcasm, each syllable a frozen needle aimed straight at the elderly woman's dignity. "Who do you think you're fooling, Miss Harris? I've worked in aviation for over 10 years, and I've learned to spot a drug smuggler at 20 paces. Someone like you, what are you even doing in first class?" She curled a mocking smile as she glanced at Edna's worn clothes, a faded gray cardigan, a simple long skirt with a few loose stitches at the hem, and scuffed brown leather shoes, polished, yes, but undeniably old. To Janet, those items were proof that Edna didn't belong in this upscale cabin. Edna trembled, knuckles white as she gripped the armrest, trying to lift her eyes to Janet. Her voice came out in ragged whispers. "Please, I've told you, that's my medicine, real medicine. I can't breathe without it." Once more, Edna raised her silver medical ID bracelet, its engraved letters glinting in the cabin lights like a last lifeline to prove her claim. Janet didn't even glance at it. She waved it away as though flicking off an annoying insect. "Save it. I can tell a cheap knockoff when I see one. People like you have all sorts of tricks up their sleeves. But sorry, you picked the wrong flight for your little performance." Each jab from Janet cut invisibly but sharply into Edna's pride and honor, deepening her shame even as she fought for air. Edna's heart clenched, not just from oxygen deprivation but from the cruelty she endured under dozens of strangers' stares. In row 12, Laura Rodriguez gripped her phone tighter, fingers trembling with outrage at the scene unfolding. She leaned in close to the screen, voice low, but clear enough for the more than 2,000 viewers watching her live broadcast. "Can you believe this? I'm on Delta Flight 447, and this elderly woman is being treated horribly, all because of her appearance and racist assumptions. Share this video. Let the world see what's happening here." Comments demanding an explanation for the airline's conduct flooded in, but none of it seemed to reach Janet. She was lost in the intoxicating certainty of her own authority, convinced she was upholding safety and order, even if it meant trampling truth and compassion. "Ms. Harris," Janet went on, raising the inhaler like a trophy, "do you really think a few crocodile tears are going to convince me to hand over this counterfeit? One last chance. Either you get off this plane now, or I'll toss this fake medicine in the trash, right here in front of everyone." Passengers nearby shifted uneasily. Some filmed the moment, but nobody dared stand up to Janet's decree. It was the terrifying silence of bystanders, witnesses to injustice too hesitant or afraid to intervene. Laura's voice cracked with emotion as she continued streaming. "Please, share this everywhere. I don't know what else to do, but we can't let this blatant discrimination happen unnoticed. This woman needs help, right now." But Janet paid no mind to the rising indignation. Her gaze never left Edna, whom she saw as a nuisance to be removed before the flight could depart on schedule. In her mind, Edna Harris was nothing more than a poor, elderly interloper trying to con her way into a luxury she didn't deserve. Edna slumped further in her seat, breaths coming in ever-shallowing gasps. Her lips had turned ashen, her life force dwindling with every passing second. She looked up at Janet one final time, her eyes a portrait of utter despair. An image that, rather than drawing sympathy, only reinforced Janet's misguided conviction that it was all an act. "Stop pretending, Miss Harris," Janet snapped, voice steely. "I will not let you delay this flight 1 second longer." For a moment, the entire cabin froze. Phones recorded every harrowing detail: the frail grandmother struggling for air, the merciless flight attendant clutching the inhaler, the silent horror of those caught between the two. A painful, prejudice-fueled confrontation was unfolding before everyone's eyes, and nobody knew how it would end. But one thing was certain: Janet Morrison's actions could never be undone. The suffocating tension in the cabin had quietly turned into a low-grade panic, especially as Edna Harris's breathing became more ragged, each gasp harsh and irregular. Janet Morrison still stood there, silently watching, her face showing nothing but contempt and the deep-seated suspicion she'd formed. In Janet's mind, the elderly woman was putting on a cheap performance to dodge the rightful scrutiny of the medication she'd smuggled aboard. Edna tried to steady herself, placing a hand over her chest as if to hold together the fragile, rapid beats of her lungs. The violent asthma attack felt like each cell in her body was being squeezed, her vision blurring from lack of oxygen. She tilted her head toward Janet and, between desperate gasps, whispered, I can't breathe anymore. Please believe me, Miss Morrison, I need my medicine." But that plea seemed unable to penetrate the wall of prejudice Janet had erected. To her, everything was already decided. Edna's threadbare clothing, her disheveled appearance, none of it fit the image of a first-class passenger she was accustomed to. In Janet's narrow worldview, the woman before her was utterly untrustworthy. Janet drew a slow breath, reinforcing her own conviction, then spoke clearly so everyone could hear. "Let me be perfectly clear, Miss Harris. Either you get off this plane right now, or I'll throw that illegal medication into the trash right here in front of everyone." Her words echoed like a hammer blow to Edna's dignity. A few passengers exchanged anxious whispers. They felt anger and discomfort, but no one dared challenge the flight attendant's absolute authority. By the window in row 8, Laura Rodriguez held her phone steady, her live-stream comments exploding with outrage. "We cannot let this happen in front of us. Share this video now. Delta Airlines must be held accountable for this horrific treatment." Janet paid no attention to the online uproar. She couldn't fathom that her every move was being broadcast live to thousands. All her focus remained on Edna, the drug smuggler she had pegged from the start, and nothing would change her mind. Desperation overtook Edna as she clutched her throat, fighting to draw even a tiny breath into her asthma-weakened lungs. The signs of crisis were undeniable, her face turning purple, sweat streaming down her forehead, her body convulsing with each gasp. Nearby, retired Dr. Robert Chen, who had tried to intervene before, could no longer stay silent. He stood and met Janet's gaze with steely resolve. "Ma'am, I'm a doctor. That woman is having a life-threatening asthma attack. With over 30 years in medicine, I assure you she will die without her inhaler." Janet remained unmoved by his warning. Instead, she offered him a provocative smile and replied coolly, "Please sit down. This is a matter of flight safety, and I will not allow any passenger interference." Her robotic dismissal left Doctor Chen stunned and powerless. He searched the cabin for support, but everyone averted their eyes, afraid to defy Janet. Edna's condition deteriorated by the second. Her uneven breaths faded into painful silence. Passengers looked at one another, anxious and wanting to protest, yet paralyzed by Janet's unyielding authority. Some continued to record discreetly from behind their seats, too fearful to act. Janet glanced at her watch, impatience flickering in her eyes, as though Edna's suffering were merely an inconvenience delaying her precious flight. "You have 3 minutes to decide, Miss Harris. Either you disembark willingly, or your medication will vanish forever." Her cruel ultimatum resonated through the cabin. Edna, exhausted and defeated, could only muster a faint whisper. "Please, I beg you, give me back my medicine." Janet turned on her heel and strode away without hesitation, unaffected by the murmurs of outrage around her. She was utterly convinced of her own judgment, unaware that she had just escalated a tragic situation into a full-blown emergency. Now the cabin air felt heavier than ever, every eye fixed on Edna, the elderly woman on the brink of death because of one person's cruel prejudice. In the oppressive, suffocating atmosphere that filled the cabin, the ringtone from Edna Harris's purse suddenly began shrieking insistently, as if trying to shatter the helpless silence of the witnessing passengers. The screen kept flashing a single name: Michael Harris. Yet the only person who could answer that urgent call was the one struggling for each fragile breath, too weak even to lift the phone. From his seat in row 14, retired Dr. Robert Chen could no longer contain his alarm when he saw Edna's lips turning an alarming shade of purple, the unmistakable sign of severe oxygen deprivation. With decades of medical experience behind him, he knew all too well what was unfolding, and that a delay of mere minutes could prove fatal. He sprang to his feet and strode swiftly toward her, his voice firm with the authority of a lifetime spent saving lives. "Miss Morrison, I can't stand by any longer. This woman is in critical condition. She needs her medication immediately, or she will stop breathing within minutes." Nearby, passengers all turned to look, their eyes filled with anxious hope at the doctor's clear, urgent intervention. But Janet Morrison stepped forward in Robert's path, her expression ice-cold and unyielding despite the gravity of his warning. "Sir, I told you very clearly, this is crew business. You are not permitted to interfere with my duties," she ground out, enunciating each word as if to knock any thought of assistance from his head. Robert froze, fists clenching at his sides in frustration and fury. He had witnessed countless emergencies in his career, but never felt so helpless or enraged. Drawing a deep, steadying breath, he met Janet's eyes with a mix of entreaty and warning. "Please listen to me. I'm not here to undermine you, but I've been a doctor for over 30 years, and I know exactly what I'm talking about. She is not faking this. She is in severe respiratory distress, and we're wasting every precious second that could keep her alive." Janet merely shook her head in haughty dismissal, a mocking smile curling her lips, as if she were confronting baseless ramblings from a troublesome passenger. "Dr. Chen, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to let someone exploit our sympathy to smuggle illegal medication on board. I've seen this routine far too often. She's just putting on a show to trick us," Janet declared with such confidence that some passengers wavered in their support of Robert's plea. The entire cabin slipped into a desperate silence. No one dared raise a voice to defend Edna or back the doctor. All eyes were cast downward, frozen by Janet's absolute authority. All the while, Edna's phone continued its frantic ringing, more urgent than ever, as if her son Michael sensed something was terribly wrong. But no matter how she strained, Edna could not reach into her bag to answer that life-saving call. Every ounce of her fading strength went into simply drawing her next ragged breath. "Please, medicine," the old woman croaked, her words barely audible. Her vision darkened, her face a ghastly purple. and her body shook violently with each failing gasp, each one a silent plea for help that went unanswered. Dr. Chen turned once more to Janet, his eyes blazing with righteous fury. "If she dies, you will bear full responsibility for your actions. This is not just an ethical matter, it's a legal one." Janet paused for a fraction of a second at his fierce warning, then immediately resumed her calm, unfeeling composure. She knew full well the authority she wielded on this flight, and she believed she had every right to wield it to ensure absolute safety. In her distorted view, this was simply another sham performance by a poor old woman, not something worthy of her concern. "Thank you for your concern," Janet replied in a chillingly composed tone. "But I know exactly what I'm doing. Please return to your seat immediately, or I will have security notified." Dr. Chen stood stunned, staring helplessly at Edna, who was now holding on to her final, labored breaths. Pain and anguish filled his face as he realized that, without immediate intervention, he might witness a life slip away before his eyes. Once again, Edna's phone rang out urgently, but she was utterly powerless. Her head slumped forward, each breath more ragged than the last. Dr. Chen clenched his jaw, battling the fear of the tragedy about to unfold, and utterly at the mercy of the callous, irrational power Janet Morrison had imposed on this frail, dying woman. The helpless look Dr. Robert Chen still wore as he gazed at Edna Harris was interrupted when Janet Morrison swiftly snapped the headset radio from her hip and spoke into it in a flat, emotionless tone. "TSA Security. This is lead flight attendant Janet Morrison on Delta Flight 447 at Gate 27. We require immediate assistance to remove a passenger exhibiting signs of carrying illegal medication." Those words, illegal medication, cut through the tense silence in the cabin like a cold bullet aimed straight at Edna's honor. The announcement not only pushed an already dire situation to its breaking point, but officially recast Edna from pitiable victim to criminal suspect in the eyes of many passengers. "No, this is a grave mistake," Robert shouted, his usual composure gone. His voice trembled with anger and alarm. "She isn't carrying opiates or any banned substance. That's her asthma medicine, I've said it clearly a dozen times. Forcing her off this plane right now could kill her." Janet surveyed the doctor with a mocking smile. To her, Robert was just another bothersome passenger obstructing her unwavering duty. She tilted her head and, knowing everyone could hear, replied in a steely voice, "Mr. Chen, I'm not interested in arguing further. My decision is based on the airline's safety regulations. You may keep your opinion, but you'd best return to your seat and remain orderly." Robert's hands clenched into fists, and his face reddened as he looked pleadingly at the other passengers. "Please, folks, we cannot stand by and let this injustice happen. This woman is on the brink of death because of one flight attendant's mistaken prejudice." But every other passenger averted their eyes, intimidated by Janet's cold resolve and the absolute authority she wielded on this flight. None dared support Robert or defend Edna, even though their hearts knew the truth. Meanwhile, Laura Rodriguez's live stream from row 12 was exploding across social media at lightning speed. Views had surpassed 100,000, and with every passing second, thousands of comments poured in condemning the blatant discrimination by the Delta Airlines flight attendant. "Everyone, we just hit over 100,000 viewers. Keep sharing this. Delta Airlines must be held accountable for what they're doing to an elderly woman in a life-threatening condition," Laura said into her phone, her voice shaking with anger and emotion. Yet none of the social media uproar could sway Janet's icy determination. She stood her ground, convinced that her honor and the rules she enforced mattered more than any life or truth. Less than a minute later, 2 TSA officers climbed aboard, their faces set in stern lines of authority. Janet pointed directly at Edna and announced each word with unassailable confidence. "The woman in this row is carrying illegal medication on board and is causing a disturbance. I demand she be removed from the aircraft immediately." The officers glanced at Edna, now nearly unconscious and slumped in her seat. They hesitated, uncertainty flickering in their eyes, until Janet's sharp command drove them to action. "Please expedite this situation so our departure isn't further delayed." Robert Chen made one last rush forward, desperation in his voice as he addressed the TSA agents. "Please listen to me. I'm a doctor. This woman is suffering a severe asthma attack. Forcing her off the plane without her medication will almost certainly kill her. You have to stop this right now." The officers exchanged uneasy looks, caught between the flight attendant's grave accusation and the seasoned doctor's expert warning. They stood frozen, unsure how to proceed in this intensely fraught standoff. At that moment, Edna's phone rang again, more insistently than before, as if Michael Harris, her son, sensed the danger his mother was in. Robert hurriedly retrieved the phone and displayed the incoming caller ID to the officers. "This is her son calling. Please, at least let me answer so he can learn what's happening to his mother." Janet's reply was immediate and unyielding. "No calls permitted at this time. She's a suspected lawbreaker, and I will not allow any interference." The cabin had become the stage for a tense, high-stakes confrontation between blind authority and human decency. Edna Harris lay on the edge of life and death, while the few who could save her were blocked by an unbending flight attendant, and hundreds of thousands more watched it all unfold in real time. In that unbearably tense moment, Edna Harris's trembling hand suddenly reached toward Dr. Robert Chen, her eyes filled with despair and the faintest glimmer of hope. Robert understood immediately. He brought the incessantly ringing phone close to her hand. Summoning all her remaining strength, Edna pressed the answer button and unconsciously switched to speakerphone. The cabin, previously steeped in heavy silence, was suddenly filled by a firm, authoritative voice coming from that tiny device. "Mom? Where are you? Why haven't you been answering my calls?" That voice swept through the cabin like a shockwave, drawing every eye to Edna and the phone. Hearing her son's voice, Edna summoned the last of her strength to whisper, barely more than a breath. "Michael, I can't breathe. They won't let me have my medicine." As those pained, quavering words ended, the voice on the other end hardened, exuding decisive authority with no hint of hesitation. He spoke loudly and clearly, as one accustomed to issuing commands. "I'm Michael Harris, Senior Vice President of Flight Operations at Delta Airlines. Who's in charge of this situation?" In an instant, all of Janet Morrison's confidence and resolve evaporated. Her face drained of color, her lips parting without words. She recognized at once whose voice it was. Michael Harris wasn't just any senior executive. He oversaw the entire domestic flight network and was someone her superiors reported to directly. Now, that very man was publicly questioning her actions in front of the entire cabin. The cabin froze. The passengers filming moments ago fell silent, raptly listening to the tense exchange unfolding. Laura Rodriguez's live stream count had already soared past 200,000 viewers, but no one in the cabin grasped the full gravity or the viral reach of what was playing out online. Dr. Chen, standing beside Edna, seized the phone and spoke with urgency and emotion. "Mr. Harris, I'm Robert Chen, a retired physician. Your mother is experiencing a life-threatening asthma attack. Lead flight attendant Janet Morrison confiscated her inhaler despite my repeated warnings that she could die without it." Michael Harris's voice turned icy, every word fired like a precise bullet. "Janet Morrison, confirm immediately. You confiscated my mother's asthma medication, correct?" Janet swallowed hard, feeling as though a boulder weighed on her chest. Panic flickered in her eyes as she scanned the cabin. Everyone was watching, waiting for her answer. For the first time in her decade-long career, she felt real fear, the same fear she had so often instilled in others. "Mr. Harris, I was just following airline safety protocol. She brought medication of unknown origin on board. I thought—" Michael cut her off sharply, his patience gone. "Unknown origin?" She wore an emergency medical ID bracelet. A licensed physician is confirming her critical condition, and you still insisted it was illegal? Do you understand how grave your mistake is?" The threat in Michael's tone left Janet trembling. All her arrogance, authority, and prejudice melted away, leaving only raw terror. She opened her mouth to speak, but Harris's voice rang out like an unappealable verdict. "I will be on that aircraft in 15 minutes. Miss Morrison, you will return my mother's medication at once and ensure she receives full medical care. You will be held fully accountable for every consequence of your reckless, irresponsible decision." Janet staggered backward, instinctively covering her mouth to stifle the panic surging through her. In that moment, her world shattered. She couldn't believe the catastrophic error she had made, one that threatened to undo the career she had built over more than 10 years. The cabin remained in stunned silence. Passengers understood the full scope of what had happened, and their eyes now bore down on Janet with unmistakable judgment. The woman who had wielded absolute power just minutes before was reduced to a frightened, pitiable figure facing the fallout of her own grievous mistake. As for Edna, though her breaths remained labored, a spark of hope lit her eyes at the sound of her son's loving, authoritative voice. She realized that, finally, this nightmare would end, though the repercussions, especially for Janet Morrison, were only just beginning. The commanding voice from the phone cut off, and chaos and fear flooded Janet Morrison's eyes. The cabin fell utterly silent. Only soft gasps and murmurs of baffled passengers broke the stillness as they attempted to grasp the gravity of what had just occurred. Janet stood motionless in the aisle, her face as white as paper, palms slick with sweat, her heart pounding in sheer panic. Less than 10 minutes later, the sound of firm, rapid footsteps thundered through the boarding doorway. Michael Harris strode into the cabin with the bearing of someone wielding absolute authority. Tall and imposing, his expression was cold and severe, his gaze piercing as he made a beeline for his mother, Edna Harris, who was still struggling for each fragile breath. The moment Michael appeared, every passenger turned, eyes fixed on his smallest movements. They all felt the genuine, undeniable power radiating from him. He knelt beside his mother, took her frail hand, and spoke in a tone both tender and urgent. "Mom, I'm here now. I'll take care of this immediately. You're going to be fine. Just try to breathe steadily." Rising, he pivoted to Janet, his eyes ice-cold and razor-sharp. His voice shifted to clear, commanding authority, each word underscoring the severity of her misconduct. "Miss Morrison, I want you to listen to every word I say. You have not only egregiously violated Delta Airlines safety regulations and flight operations protocols, you have also broken federal law by willfully refusing to provide emergency medication to a passenger in a life-threatening condition." He paused, fixing her with a look of stern judgment, then continued with unflinching resolve. "Do you understand that your prejudiced, unprofessional actions nearly cost my mother her life?" Janet trembled. Her usual confidence evaporated. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, but fear choked her voice. "Mr. Harris, I honestly didn't know. I misunderstood. Please give me a chance to explain." Michael cut her off with icy finality, his words echoing through the cabin for all to hear. "Explain? I doubt you have anything left to explain. My mother wore a medical ID bracelet to confirm her condition, Doctor. Chen warned you directly, and yet you persisted in your prejudice. You not only violated professional protocol, you demonstrated an unacceptable lack of ethics." His cutting words sent a shiver through the cabin. Passengers who had been reluctant now nodded in agreement, their looks of condemnation unmistakable. Laura Rodriguez's live stream had swelled to nearly 500,000 viewers, and social media brimmed with outrage. Realizing the gravity of her error, Janet's hands shook as she retrieved the asthma inhaler she'd confiscated, offering it to Michael with trembling fingers, her voice thick with remorse. "Mr. Harris, I am truly sorry. I never intended to harm your mother. This is her medication. Please take it." Michael said nothing more. He accepted the inhaler, returned it to Edna, and helped her use it immediately. As she inhaled her first dose, Edna's breathing steadied, and the alarming purple color drained from her face. A collective sigh of relief swept through the cabin as passengers witnessed her condition visibly improve. Once he was certain his mother was safe, Michael turned back to Janet, his tone firm and resolute. "Ms. Morrison, I hope you understand that today's actions have consequences far beyond an apology. I will demand that the airline open a full investigation and take appropriate disciplinary action under both legal and company policies. You have forfeited any right to continue in this role." Janet heard each word as a dagger to her pride. She stepped back, tears streaming down her cheeks, finally feeling the weight of her arrogance and prejudice. In a trembling whisper, she made one last plea. "Please, Mr. Harris, I beg you. I don't want to lose my job. I never meant to harm your mother." He shook his head coldly, his final words ringing with unassailable authority. "It's too late, Miss Morrison. Every decision has a price, and today you have crossed every permissible line." Janet stood frozen, realization crashing over her that everything she had built was crumbling away. The entire cabin bore witness to this pivotal moment, and to the irreversible fallout of her arrogance and discrimination. Michael returned to his mother's side, comforting her gently, while Janet, once the figure of absolute power on this flight, was left a symbol of failure, regret, and despair. A dark chapter had closed, but the repercussions of this incident were only just beginning. The cabin remained engulfed in a heavy silence, every passenger's eyes now fixed on Janet Morrison, the woman who just minutes ago wielded absolute authority on this flight, and yet now stood at the center of scorn, judgment, and disappointment. She trembled in place, as if trapped in an unending nightmare. Once he'd ensured his mother was stable, Michael Harris turned and pulled out his phone to call Delta's senior support team. No more than 15 minutes later, 2 senior members of the airline's internal investigation unit and a legal officer boarded through the aircraft door. Their arrival instantly transformed Delta Flight 447's cabin into a makeshift courtroom where justice would be served before everyone's eyes. Michael strode to the aisle and addressed Janet in a cold, precise voice, each word measured so the entire cabin could grasp the severity of what had transpired. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am Michael Harris, Senior Vice President of Domestic Flight Operations for Delta Airlines. Today, I will personally oversee the investigation into the very serious incident that just occurred on this flight." He turned to Janet, locking eyes with her as she quaked in fear, and continued with firm clarity. Miss Morrison, you need to understand the consequences your actions have caused, not only for me and my mother, but for Delta Airlines itself. By refusing to provide life-saving medication to a passenger, you have violated federal law, specifically the Americans with Disabilities Act and mandatory FAA safety regulations. Janet opened her mouth to speak again, but Michael raised a hand to halt her, then drove his point home even more sharply, each phrase like a nail sealing her fate. I also want you to recognize the financial and reputational damage your mistake threatens to inflict on Delta Airlines. Because your actions were streamed live and viewed by over 500,000 people, the airline now faces the risk of major lawsuits and severe brand damage, potentially amounting to millions of dollars. Michael's words weren't just directed at Janet. They served as a stern warning to the entire crew. Every syllable carried the weight of responsibility, professional ethics, and the law. The cabin seemed to hold its breath as even the most hesitant passengers nodded in agreement with his every word. Their eyes reflected not just judgment, but deep disappointment in someone entrusted with their safety. Michael then nodded to the legal officer, who stepped forward and handed Janet an official airline document outlining 2 clear options. Michael spoke deliberately but unwaveringly. Ms. Morrison, this is your final opportunity to decide. Delta Airlines offers you 2 choices. First, you may resign immediately, with the commitment that you will not work in aviation again, or second, you will be terminated for gross violation of company policy, and we will refer your case to the authorities for further criminal investigation into endangering a passenger's life. A deadly silence followed his declaration. Janet stood stock still, trembling, tears streaming down her face. Before her lay not just the end of her career, but the real possibility of legal consequences that could destroy her future. In a voice barely above a whisper, she managed, "Mr. Harris, I made a grave mistake, and I am truly sorry. Please give me a chance to make amends. I don't want to lose everything." Michael regarded her coolly, his tone crisp as a blade. "I'm sorry, Miss Morrison, but it's too late for apologies or atonement. You have crossed every permissible line. Your decision now is not about saving yourself. It's about accepting responsibility for what you have done." Every eye in the cabin turned toward Janet, awaiting her final choice. This aircraft had become a tribunal, and Janet, once absolute in her power, now faced judgment for her grievous error. Janet bowed her head, struggling to contain the storm of emotions inside her. Finally, she lifted her gaze and spoke, her voice trembling with pain and despair. "I understand. I will resign immediately. I have no right to continue in this role. I accept full responsibility for what has happened." Michael nodded once, his tone softening slightly, yet remaining firm. "You have made the right decision, Miss Morrison. I hope that after today you realize prejudice and power must never trump ethics and compassion." Janet fell silent, her tears unceasing. In that moment she fully comprehended that the career, reputation, and future she had built had crumbled in an instant, brought down by pride and misplaced prejudice. Michael then addressed the passengers. "On behalf of Delta Airlines, I sincerely apologize to our customers for today's serious incident. We pledge to investigate thoroughly and take decisive action to ensure nothing like this ever happens again." A gentle round of applause rippled through the cabin in appreciation. Edna Harris, now breathing steadily, squeezed her son's hand gratefully. In everyone's eyes shone the knowledge that justice and accountability had prevailed, not through coercive power, but through steadfast compassion and the unwavering defense of what is right. The moment Michael Harris finished speaking, the cabin fell into a profound, thoughtful silence. Janet Morrison stood in the aisle, trembling, her pride and authority gone. Her eyes flicked over the passengers. None offered sympathy, only cold, accusing, disappointed stares. Michael turned to the two TSA officers standing by the door and gave a slight nod. They stepped forward and spoke firmly. "Ms. Morrison, we will escort you off the aircraft immediately." Janet bowed her head and began to walk down the aisle in slow, shame-laden steps. As she passed each row, passengers no longer held back. Many shook their heads. Some whispered their disapproval, all reminding her of the price of her actions. When she reached Edna's seat, Janet paused, her eyes full of regret. Her voice quivered as she offered a belated apology. "Mrs. Harris, I am truly sorry for everything I caused. I hope you can forgive me." Edna looked up at Janet without anger or blame, only deep sadness and a measure of compassion. She replied softly but clearly, "Miss Morrison, I can forgive you, but please remember that wounds inflicted by prejudice and a lack of kindness aren't easily healed. I only hope you learn a profound lesson from this." Edna's words cut deep into Janet's conscience. Without another word, Janet lowered her head and continued down the aisle, the TSA officers silently guiding her out of the cabin. The door closed behind Janet like the final seal on a dark chapter of her life. Every passenger knew they had just witnessed a costly lesson about arrogance, prejudice, and their grave consequences. Michael Harris then addressed the cabin in a gentler yet determined tone. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Delta Airlines, I sincerely apologize to all of you, especially to my mother, Mrs. Edna Harris, for today's serious incident. As a leader of this airline, I promise you we will investigate fully and take decisive action to ensure nothing like this ever happens again." A ripple of applause rose through the cabin, slow at first, then building to a hearty ovation for Michael's fairness and courage. Passengers felt they had seen a true leader, one who not only upholds justice, but has the bravery to admit mistakes and pledge transparent remedies. Dr. Robert Chen came forward and shook Michael's hand, his eyes full of respect. "Mr. Harris, I truly admire how you handled this situation today. Your actions are a shining example of responsibility and compassion, qualities our society urgently needs. Thank you for all you did." Michael returned the handshake with genuine gratitude. "No, Doctor, thank you. Without your timely, steadfast intervention, this could have ended far worse. I am deeply grateful." Meanwhile, Laura Rodriguez's live stream had eclipsed 1 million views. Online commentators praised Michael Harris's swift, fair handling of the crisis and urged Delta Airlines and all carriers to implement measures preventing such incidents in the future. Michael then sat beside his mother, gently taking her hand. "How are you feeling, Mom? Are you doing better?" Edna offered a weak smile and glanced proudly at her son. "I'm all right now, Michael. With you here, I feel safe and comforted. I'm so proud of you." Michael squeezed her hand, feeling both relief and warmth in his heart. He knew that, though he'd faced one of the most challenging moments of his career, he had made the right choice. Standing up for justice, ethics, and compassion, the values he held most dear. Delta Flight 447 was now ready to continue its journey, but every passenger understood that they had experienced more than just an in-flight incident. They'd witnessed the stark consequences of prejudice and blind pride, and most importantly, the power of true compassion and responsible leadership. As the plane prepared for takeoff, the cabin's atmosphere had transformed from tense to serene, with the reassuring knowledge that justice had finally prevailed. The moment Delta 447 lifted off and reached cruising altitude, An emergency meeting convened in Delta Airlines' senior operations office at JFK. In the boardroom, the atmosphere was heavier and more tense than anyone could remember. Key executives sat staring at a large screen replaying Laura Rodriguez's explosive live stream. View counts had soared past 2 million in less than 2 hours since the broadcast began. On social media, the hashtag number Justice for Edna trended nationwide, with hundreds of thousands of comments and shares from across the U.S. and around the world. The public outcry was immense, and Delta's leadership knew they had to act swiftly and decisively to salvage the airline's reputation. As soon as the plane was stable, Michael Harris dialed into the meeting via in-flight conferencing. Before Delta's top executives, he recapped the incident in precise detail, dissected the root causes of the failure, and delivered a stark warning about the long-term brand damage Delta would suffer if they didn't respond immediately. Today's events exposed a critical gap in our procedures for identifying and handling passengers' medical devices. A customer nearly died because of ignorance, prejudice, and the wrongful actions of one crew member. This can never happen again. The executives listened in silence, fully aware that this was not an isolated mishap but a wake-up call for the entire industry. Michael pressed on with resolve, proposing urgent policy changes. I recommend we immediately establish new regulations for verifying and managing all medical devices aboard our flights. Every crew member must undergo emergency training on recognizing and handling life-saving equipment, and we must create clearer protocols for assisting passengers experiencing health crises. Impressed by his clarity and urgency, Delta's leadership unanimously approved the policy overhaul. Within hours, the airline issued an urgent bulletin announcing that within 24 hours, new rules would be in place and mandatory, comprehensive training would begin for all flight crew on identifying and managing critical medical devices. Delta's decisive response triggered a domino effect. Within hours, United, American, and Southwest Airlines publicly pledged to adopt similar policies. What began as a horrific in-flight incident on Delta 447 became a powerful catalyst for sweeping, industry-wide reform. Meanwhile, Laura Rodriguez's live stream continued to go viral, drawing attention from CNN, ABC News, Fox News, and other major outlets. Edna Harris's story topped front pages nationwide, sparking heated debates about racial bias, social prejudice, and serious lapses in passenger health protection. Laura, who had intended only to document a small injustice, found herself in the media spotlight. In a brief on-camera interview with CNN after landing, she spoke with emotion and clarity. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. I just wanted to call out one unfair incident, but it turned into something huge. I hope all of us learn how dangerous ignorance and prejudice can be. Millions of Americans hailed Laura as a hero of fairness and compassion in modern society. Across social media, hundreds of thousands of users shared Edna's story and urged airlines and other public service providers to overhaul their policies to prevent similar tragedies. Within 24 hours, Delta launched a special mandatory training program for over 20,000 flight crew nationwide. The curriculum covered the identification and handling of asthma inhalers, insulin, cardiac devices, and other emergency medications. Delta also rolled out a mobile app allowing passengers to register health conditions and medical devices in advance, ensuring crews could verify and assist as needed. Delta's policy changes earned widespread praise from medical experts, disability rights groups, and frequent flyers alike. Other airlines quickly followed suit, ushering in unprecedented industry-wide reforms. Michael Harris, who spearheaded this landmark initiative, emerged not only as a top airline executive, but also as a symbol of courage, social responsibility, and leadership under crisis. That day, every passenger on Delta 447 understood that although the incident was a painful ordeal, it also ignited a vital, silent revolution, one that would make commercial aviation more humane and equitable for everyone. After Delta 447 took off and reached cruising altitude, an emergency meeting was convened in Delta Airlines' Senior Operations Office at JFK. In the boardroom, the atmosphere was more tense and somber than anyone could remember. Executives sat staring at a large screen replaying Laura Rodriguez's explosive live stream. The video's view count had skyrocketed past 2 million in under 2 hours. On social media, the hashtag number Justice for Edna trended nationwide, with hundreds of thousands of comments and shares from across the U.S. and around the world. Public pressure was immense, and Delta's leadership knew they had to act decisively to protect the airline's reputation. Michael Harris, still in flight, joined the meeting via video link. Before Delta's top executives, he detailed the incident, analyzed its root causes, and issued a stern warning about the long-term brand damage Delta would face without immediate action. Today's events exposed a serious gap in our procedures for identifying and handling passengers' medical devices. A customer almost died due to ignorance, prejudice, and wrongful actions by a crew member. This can never happen again. Silence fell as the executives absorbed his words, realizing this wasn't an isolated incident but a wake-up call for the entire industry. Michael continued, laying out urgent policy changes. I propose we immediately establish new regulations for verifying, identifying, and managing all medical devices aboard our flights. Every crew member must undergo emergency training on recognizing and handling life-saving equipment, and we need clear protocols to support passengers experiencing health crises. Moved by his clarity and conviction, Delta's leadership unanimously approved the reforms. Within hours, the airline issued an urgent bulletin announcing that, within 24 hours, new policies would be in effect and mandatory training would begin for all flight crew on handling critical medical devices. Delta's swift response triggered a domino effect. United, American, and Southwest Airlines quickly announced their own similar initiatives. What began as a horrific in-flight incident on Delta 447 became a catalyst for sweeping industry reform. Meanwhile, Laura Rodriguez's live stream went viral with major networks, CNN, ABC, Fox News, picking up the story. Edna Harris's ordeal dominated front pages nationwide, sparking fierce debates about racial bias, social prejudice, and serious lapses in protecting passenger health. Laura, who had merely intended to document one small injustice, found herself in the media spotlight. In a brief CNN interview after landing, she said, "I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I just wanted to call out one unfair incident, but it exploded into something much bigger. I hope we all learn how dangerous ignorance and prejudice can be." Millions of Americans hailed Laura as a hero for justice and compassion. On social media, hundreds of thousands shared Edna's story, urging airlines and other public service providers to overhaul their policies to prevent such tragedies. Within 24 hours, Delta launched a mandatory special training program for over 20,000 flight crew nationwide, covering the identification and handling of asthma inhalers, insulin, cardiac devices, and other emergency medications. Delta also rolled out a mobile app allowing passengers to pre-register their health conditions and medical devices, so crews could verify and assist as needed. Delta's reforms received high praise from medical experts, disability rights groups, and frequent flyers. Other airlines quickly followed suit, creating unprecedented industry-wide standards. Michael Harris, who led this landmark effort, emerged as not only a top airline executive, but as a symbol of courage, social responsibility, and leadership in crisis. That day, every passenger on Delta 447 understood they had witnessed more than an in-flight scandal. They had seen the stark consequences of prejudice and blind arrogance, and the transformative power of compassion and accountable leadership. As the plane resumed its journey, the cabin's atmosphere had shifted from tension to renewed trust, secure in the knowledge that justice had been served. The story of Mrs. Edna Harris didn't stop at the aviation industry. It quickly became a beacon for millions of Americans about the power of compassion, justice, and social responsibility. What began as a singular incident on Delta Flight 447 has grown into a profound symbol in the fight against ageism, racism, and the protection of disability rights in every walk of life. Just a few months after the incident, Edna Harris received an official letter from the United States Congress inviting her to testify at a special hearing on the rights of elderly and disabled air travelers. That invitation was not only an honor, but a formal acknowledgement of the impact her experience had made. On the day of the hearing, the House chamber was packed. Senators, media representatives, and advocates from numerous social organizations watched intently as the elderly woman took the podium. Edna walked forward slowly but with unwavering resolve. Though her eyes were those of a woman well into her later years, they shone with deep conviction. In a warm, clear voice that carried throughout the hall, she began, "Esteemed members of Congress, I am not a public figure or an activist. I'm simply a grandmother, a mother, an ordinary American like so many of you. But my story on Delta Flight 447 taught me that discrimination isn't just an individual or organizational problem. It's all of our problem as citizens in this society." She paused to look around the chamber, her gaze gentle but firm, then continued, her voice stirring. "What hurt me most wasn't the physical pain I endured, but the crushing helplessness of being mistreated simply because of my age, my skin color, and preconceived biases. No one deserves to go through that, not at any age, under any circumstances." Her heartfelt words resonated deeply with the lawmakers, and a wave of emotion swept through the nation. Edna's testimony became a powerful call to action, awakening people to the true value of justice, compassion, and our shared responsibility. Within weeks, Congress passed a set of new regulations informally named the Edna Harris Act, designed to ensure every airline strictly protects and assists elderly and disabled passengers. These rules went beyond mere legal requirements. They embodied America's commitment to a fairer, more respectful environment for its most vulnerable travelers. But Edna's influence extended far beyond aviation. Her story was incorporated into training programs at major hospitals, universities, and customer service organizations nationwide. Each curriculum analyzed the critical errors that nearly cost her life on Delta Flight 447 and taught how to recognize and respond to similar situations, preventing future tragedies. At colleges and in nonprofit leadership courses, Edna's case became a classic example in ethics, cultural competence, and crisis management. Hundreds of thousands of students and service professionals learned that a single thoughtless decision or prejudiced action could have devastating, lasting consequences. Meanwhile, Michael Harris, now Delta's Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion, partnered closely with social organizations and government agencies to expand public training campaigns on disability rights, aging, and anti-discrimination. In speeches, he consistently reminded audiences, "We cannot build a civilized society if we continue to tolerate prejudice. Only when every individual recognizes their duty to the community can we truly progress." For her part, Janet Morrison, once a highly respected lead flight attendant, remained in the background, quietly working at a small grocery store in suburban New York. Every time Edna's story resurfaced in the news, Janet was reminded of the terrible mistake she made. Her new, modest life served as a constant reminder of how far-reaching the effects of prejudice and indifference can be. She lived each day haunted by the question, if she had acted differently that day, how different might her life be now? But the most important legacy of Mrs. Edna Harris's story is the profound lesson it taught about the power of compassion, accountability, and justice. The changes sparked by her ordeal went far beyond regulations and policies. They transformed individual mindsets, making people realize that every word and every action carries tremendous responsibility. Edna Harris, a grandmother who nearly lost her life to bias, has become an enduring symbol of the fight against injustice, inspiring a movement toward a more fair and compassionate society. Her experience aboard Delta Flight 447 will forever stand as a living testament to that truth. By the time Mrs. Edna Harris's story had far surpassed a single flight incident, virtually all of America knew her name. Every appearance she and her son, Michael Harris, made on major TV programs moved millions of viewers, prompting deep reflection on responsibility and compassion. They had become the voices of the vulnerable, those who had suffered injustice but chose to stand up and effect change. One especially memorable evening, Edna and Michael were invited as honored guests on the Oprah Winfrey Show, whose reach extends to millions. The audience watched, rapt, as mother and son recounted their harrowing flight, then described the profound societal impact they had sparked. Michael spoke first, earnest yet powerful. My mother probably never imagined her small story could have such reach, but I've always believed that if each of us has the courage to stand against injustice, we can change the world in ways we never expected. Edna smiled proudly at her son's words, then turned to the audience. Her voice was slow, deliberate, each word ringing with meaning. What I learned from my experience is this: silence is never the right choice when we witness injustice. By remaining silent, we allow wrong to persist. But when each of us speaks out, documents what we see, shares our stories, even through the smallest action, we create a powerful force capable of changing the world. The studio fell into thoughtful silence, moved by her words. Edna continued, her tone warm but resolute. Each of us can be part of that change. It doesn't matter who you are, how old you are, or where you come from. What matters is whether you have the courage to speak up for justice. At my age, I never thought I'd become an advocate. Yet life sometimes pushes us into moments where we must choose, stay silent and accept injustice, or stand up to defend truth and fairness. Her closing words sparked a thunderous, heartfelt standing ovation. Oprah Winfrey then turned to Michael and asked about civic responsibility. Oprah, Michael, what can each of us do to prevent situations like your mother's from happening again? Michael replied with confidence and depth. The most important thing is for each of us to feel a sense of responsibility to our community. When we witness injustice or discrimination, we must never think it's not our concern. We need the courage to stand up, speak out, share the truth, and fight to build a more just and humane society. He paused, looking straight into the camera as if speaking individually to every viewer. I believe responsibility isn't some lofty ideal. It's in our small daily actions, recording an injustice, sharing a story online, or simply supporting someone vulnerable who needs our help. At the show's close, Oprah addressed the audience with heartfelt sincerity. You've heard the extraordinary story of Edna Harris and her son, Michael Harris. I hope each of us takes away something profound from their experience. Tonight, I invite you, all of you, to share your own experiences of injustice you've seen or endured, because every time you speak up, you build community strength, a force that can reshape our society. Within hours of the broadcast, thousands, then millions, began sharing their stories online under the hashtag #SpeakUpForJustice. In just a few hours, the movement spread across the U.S. and around the globe, inspiring millions to stand for compassion and fairness. As for Janet Morrison, the former lead flight attendant whose prejudice set this all in motion, she watched this wave of solidarity with a painful awareness. Though she had lost everything, the lesson she now bore was one of responsibility, compassion, and the grave cost of indifference. Michael and his mother have since devoted their lives to traveling the country, visiting schools, hospitals, nonprofits, and government agencies to spread their powerful message of justice and empathy. What began as a small incident on one flight became a much larger story about the power of community and the duty each of us has to stand up for what is right. In a stirring address to thousands at a community event, Edna herself urged, "We cannot remain silent in the face of injustice. Speak up, document it, and fight for what is right, because every small action can change the world. Today, I call on everyone here and everyone watching from afar. Share your story. Let your voice become part of the force that builds a better society." Mrs. Edna Harris's remarkable journey is more than a lesson in courage, responsibility, and the power of compassion. It's a reminder that every small act can spark enormous change. Have you ever witnessed or experienced injustice? Share your story in the comments below and help spread the power of community. Don't forget to like, share this video, and subscribe for more inspiring stories every day. Thank you for being part of this movement.